Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits and I'm currently boiling up some mittens and some whiskers from kittens in an old copper kettle. Well, they're just a few of my favourite things. Which takes us inexorably back to The Sound of Music, and the third of our programmes about the live musicals that you could have seen on British television over Christmas in 2015. In the last two episodes we've discussed The Sound of Music Live, which was on ITV, and used all the televisual grammar of television as it used to be, rather than cinema or theatre, in order to get across its live performance of that wonderful evergreen show. And last week we discussed the very different approach to broadcasting live musical theatre, which was the one adopted by the BBC when BBC4 presented Gypsy, a telecast version of the live show which was performed on stage at the Savoy Theatre. In both cases, both shows were marvellous and the live version was tremendously successful. However, we're going to complete this little run of 3 episodes with a very different approach to looking at The Sound of Music. And you may remember a couple of weeks ago I confessed to Tim Sayward, when we were talking about The Sound of Music, that I had never actually seen that show. I've neither seen it in the theatre on the stage, nor have I ever seen the film with Julie Andrews. But of course culturally I've picked up elements of The Sound of Music. I know most of the songs. It turned out that we sang lots of them when I was a schoolboy. And of course some of the motifs of the piece are so firmly ingrained in Western culture that you can't escape them. As I said 2 episodes ago, watching a nun run up a hill, you're expecting her to sing "The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music." And that particular scene has been spoofed so often by so many people that it seeped into the consciousness of us all. Now, if you watched The Sound of Music live on ITV just before Christmas, you may have followed Musical Talk's Twitter feed, as there was a live tweeting commentary running simultaneously with the production. But I, as a Sound of Music virgin, was watching it on my own, doing something very similar, but not quite the same. And it's that we're going to be talking about today, because it occurred to me that actually I'm quite rare. I'm someone who's interested in musical theatre and understands what musical theatre is about, who's reached middle age, I'm sad to say, without seeing The Sound of Music, and so I will be one of the very few people, probably anywhere, who will be coming to The Sound of Music absolutely fresh, not knowing the story, not knowing the detail, not knowing how it operates. And I thought I would take notes of anything that struck me as the performance progressed. And these could be anything. They might be about a particular typeface used for the intertitles. It might be about some aspect of how the production looked on television. It might be something about the performance, or it might be something about the show as written, about the original text. And indeed, looking back on my notes, all of those issues and plenty more came up. So I thought I would do what might be called a post-show tweet review, although these aren't tweets, of how The Sound of Music struck me as someone who had never seen it. And so what I'm going to be doing for the rest of today's programme is essentially reading out my notes and expanding upon them ever so slightly to give you an idea of what I was experiencing watching The Sound of Music for the very first time. Now, I don't know, this could prove to be a tremendously dry and dull episode, or it might be an episode full of insights and surprising thoughts, and perhaps ones that you have never considered, because I'm assuming that you, like most people, will have seen The Sound of Music many, many times before. So let's see where we go with this together, as we look at The Sound of Music live, point by point. Musical Talk. Well, we're right at the beginning of the programme and I've got a blank sheet of paper in front of me. And the very first thing that strikes me is the fact that ITV are making a thing about this. And I don't blame them. They're saying that this is the first time in UK television history that a musical has been shown live. And they make a point of letting me know there's live singing, so I know what to expect. Mark you, the Radio Times had made that plain, and so had all the pre-publicity. And here we are as the production starts. They seem to be starting with what looks like original cine film of Salzburg, presumably as a way of trying to get one into the atmosphere of what we're about to see in Austria. And now we've cut to what I would call a countdown clock, the feeder tape before a film starts, where the countdown goes 10, 9, 8, 7, etc., until you get to about 3 when you get the blank screen, and then the film starts. Now, I can see what they're doing there. They're trying to show that this is live, and they're counting down to the beginning of the production. But for me, that countdown clock absolutely suggests film. I don't associate that with theatre or live television performances in any way. So that's an interesting decision by the directorial team there. And now we've cut to the title of the piece, The Sound of Music. But now, I don't know the film, but as I say, I know it culturally well enough, and I've seen the logo on albums and posters and online, of course, and that does look like that logo. It looks to me like they're borrowing aspects of the film in order to ease us as the audience into it. It might be subtly different, but to me it looks like the logo from the film The Sound of Music. And now we're in the nunnery. I can see that. I can see the nuns. This is a courtyard, so this is the opening scene. And much to my surprise, we're getting a song in Latin. That's quite strange, actually. It's not a song I recognise. It certainly proves to me that they're nuns. It doesn't suggest they're very carefree. It's also quite a downbeat start to the show. We're getting lots of detail about the nunnery. Lots and lots of detail, in fact. You can see the stonework looks very authentic and things like that. But in a very strange, static sense. I mean, it is essentially just nuns walking through a courtyard in a stone nunnery. Now we're getting an aerial shot. So we're seeing choreography now. So this is aerial choreography of nuns moving. And now that's something that can't be done on stage. So that immediately feels very televisual. It's certainly not cinematic and it's certainly not theatrical. But where is Maria? Now, I know that she's the central nun, at least at the beginning. Here she is. And here we have the first big song. The hills are alive with the sound of music. Now, that's interesting. She's leaning on a tree. She appears to be in some kind of dell in a wood, which makes it very small scale. So she's singing this huge song about mountains, hills and music. But funnily enough, it's not matched in the direction. It's quite small. There's no scope. And of course I can't help but run in my head Julie Andrews running up a hill and singing it to a cameraman who I've always assumed was on a crane, who's above her. Now that's interesting. They're using choreography to show character. Because Maria is cartwheeling, which is impressive when you're dressed as a nun, it must be said. But that marks her out as an individual character. So here we are quite quickly on. Maria is being shown to be an unusual nun, and clearly she's going to be the plain protagonist. That dell, it's not in a wood at all. It turns out it's in the nunnery garden. She's just round the back of the building. I've written here, she is not soaring on the high notes. And I think I need to explain here, so many of the songs of The Sound of Music are considered to be enormous anthems, or emotionally charged, or inspiring in some way. And of course, The Sound of Music is one of those. It feels big in its ambition and scope. And yet at the moment, everything is being played down small. She was in a dell, in a garden, and she's singing the song in a much lower-powered way. That's not a criticism of the performance. I think this is a directorial decision. But it's very interesting to me. Of course, I'm assuming all these songs are going to be sung big, and they're not. I can now hear the cameras pulling away on their track, presumably, across the stone floor of the nunnery as the nuns walk towards it. That's live television for you, folks. Time for another song. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Well, she has been shown to be a little unusual. And of course, at the moment, we have no reason to believe these nuns are anything other than arch-conservative nuns living a secluded life in a nunnery somewhere. And one makes the assumption that that is an environment where individuality is not encouraged. And this song seems to be summing that up. Interesting dialogue. She is always late for chapel, but her penitence is real. Now, anyone who's listened to Musical Talk for any length of time before will know that I am not a fan of Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals particularly, often complaining that they're very stately and slow. I've written down here, medium tempo, good character song. And I think that's true. This is fairly upbeat for a Rodgers and Hammerstein, and certainly so far in this show it's the first time we've had a bit of light-heartedness. I like this bit where the cross nun, who clearly doesn't like Maria, is not getting or joining in with the choreography of the Mother Superior and the other two singing nuns. That's not a sentence I often write down, I must say. However, it does show that she's quite a stern nun, and in fact all the others have a slightly lighter spirit, I suppose is the best way of describing it. It's good, it's bringing out the character. I'm enjoying this. Gosh, well, night's fallen very suddenly. There's no transition there. We've gone straight from day to night. I suppose that's something that you can do on stage much more easily, where you can make the transition from one scene to another, and it's part of the grammar of stage productions. You can't do it so easily on television. Scenes are not delineated in the same way, so we have just lurched, it must be said, from daytime to nighttime. Oh, another song, My Favourite Things. Well, I wasn't expecting her to sing it to the Mother Superior, and I wasn't expecting the Mother Superior to say that it's one of the songs from her youth, one of her favourite songs, in fact, one of her favourite things, presumably. Now that's interesting. That tells me something about the Mother Superior and her attitude to her novices. It also suggests something else. Certainly within the context of the piece, these songs are presumably folk songs or songs that have been handed down. They're not speech marks new, so she is singing them diegetically. They are songs which are known by other people. They aren't just outpourings of the emotion of the character that we're seeing at that time. This one again is another medium tempo song, which is as fast as Rodgers and Hammerstein ever really get. And funnily enough, I've written, this could be longer, I'm enjoying this. And what we're really getting here is a heart-to-heart between the Mother Superior and Maria. Oh, and a reprise of My Favourite Things. Oh, this is a cappella at first. Oh, and now we're having an advertisement break. Well, we're now back from the advertisement break, and I see we've had a scene change. So that's clever. The director here is using the need to have advertisements, because this is on the independent channel ITV, where they have adverts, to act as the punctuation for the storytelling. So she's making a virtue of one of the requirements of television, certainly commercial television. We appear to be in an enormous hallway. I must say, if I was a designer or an architect, I wouldn't build a house with a hallway quite as large as that. That seems a remarkable waste of space. Probably big enough to sing and dance in, I'll imagine, though. And we're obviously in some enormous house, or a Schloss, as I think they're called in Germany and Austria. Oh, and here we have Mel Giedroyc, who's the cross housekeeper. That's actually quite interesting casting, because I always associate her as being a fairly affable person. She's quite harumphy here. Oh. Now, Maria has arrived as the governess in the Schloss, and there's a musical underscoring. That's the use of incidental music. Now, one doesn't associate that with theatre, but I suppose it does happen. One does associate it with television, however. I wonder if that's an interpretation that's been put in for the television. If so, it sticks out, certainly to the point where I've written it down, which normally incidental music in television drama and indeed film drama doesn't do. It's supposed to heighten an emotional situation without you really noticing it. It can be manipulative. This just appears to be almost a leitmotif, or certainly a ta-da, look who's arrived. Interesting use of musical underscoring there. Ah, well, if you've got a hall, you should use it. I see that now Captain Von Trapp and Maria have met for the very first time in that enormous hallway. Now, what's interesting here is the staging. The Captain and Maria are standing a very long way apart from each other in this hall as they have a conversation. Now, I certainly wouldn't expect them to have any kind of informality here, but the distance at which they're standing apart from each other is profound. It's very wide. It's like they're shouting at each other across a hallway. Funnily enough, that looks really theatrical. It looks like they've been told to stand there in order to fill the space. Ah, the arrival of the Von Trapp children. Gosh, their entrance is striking, isn't it? I've written here, 7 children more or less goose step in. And they're all wearing blue uniforms. That's interesting. They're setting up here a militaristic household, aren't they? And of course we all know the context of this piece is the rise of the Nazis in Germany and Austria. And suddenly we have a brigade of children in uniforms goose-stepping, or at least marching in unison. Has this been done to make me feel that we're in a Nazi household? That's what it feels like it's trying to suggest. I'm sure we'll find out. Well, the Captain and Maria are continuing their conversation, and I think it must be said are sparring. It feels very formal, slightly antagonistic, and yet at the same time I know enough about musical theatre to know that means something. So obviously the fact that they clearly don't like each other means they like each other, I think. Oh, that's interesting. There's a quotation there. Now that's an American usage of English rather than a British usage. Bearing in mind we're in Austria, I suppose that doesn't make much difference, but it's "Your dream is the ugliest I ever saw." In English pronunciation would be "Your dream is the ugliest I've ever seen." It's a recognised cultural difference between the two nations about how they use English, particularly in the past tense. Ah, we've come to another song. I don't recognise this verse at all. I don't think I've ever heard this before. Is this a new song? Oh no, it's Doe a Deer. Right, I do know this song. I used to sing it at school. I certainly didn't know that verse, though. I think we only ever sang the chorus. In fact, I've only ever heard the chorus. Well, yes, this is all very jolly. Oh, la, a note to follow so. That really lets these lyrics down, I must say. There must be a way of coming up with something better than that. It's basically singing la, the next note. Still, there's some good character stuff coming through here. The children are enjoying themselves. Now, it's been made clear that their mother died relatively recently, but it's barely been mentioned at all. It certainly doesn't seem to be affecting the children. It's affecting the father, but not the children. That's curious. I've written down here, Kurt is the best child actor. He's certainly the one with the biggest personality, and he's the one who I think's got the best presence. And yet he's a middle child, towards the lower end, in fact. He certainly gives those children some much-needed character, it must be said. Ah, here we are, when you know the notes to sing. This is the first time we've seen joy anywhere in this show so far, except shown by Maria. That's telling, isn't it? Maria is giving joy to other people. Well, here we are, a totally different scene. This appears to be in the grounds of the Schloss at night. This is Rolf, the telegraph boy. He's quite handsome. And Liesel, who's the eldest daughter. They seem to be flirting. Right. Now, this is interesting. This is the first suggestion of any romance in the piece so far. It feels very much like Rolf and Liesel are going to be the main romantic couple in this piece. And now they're singing You Are 16 Going on 17. Oh, he's a tenor. He's singing much higher than I would have expected. I don't know why. That's odd, isn't it? I expected him to have more of a baritone, I think. Well, this feels very abrupt in a strange way. If this is the main emotional relationship in the piece, it's not been developed. It's turned up. Well, they clearly are the love interest. It's the only thing we've seen of this kind. Now, I see Liesel's now wearing a dress. So obviously the blue uniforms have been given a heave-ho. That suggests some loosening in the household, doesn't it? So that joy that we saw earlier is obviously permeating through. Oh dear. We're watching this song, You Are 16 Going on 17, and in the verse that Liesel sings, there's something unfortunate in Rolf's pocket. It could very well be a microphone pack, or a packet of cigarettes, or a wallet, but I have to say, oh dear. It's rather unfortunate. It does make Rolf look like he's dancing with an erection. Well, we're going through an extended choreographic sequence here. They're dancing around in the garden. But look, they're dancing together in sort of not just choreography, but symmetry, which suggests they're simpatico, really, doesn't it? That really does seem to suggest that they are made for each other. Certainly I wouldn't like to dance unexpectedly through a rose garden at night with someone I barely knew. Well, look at that. That ended very quickly. In fact, it ends with a kiss, very abruptly indeed. And there's no real resolution to that song. I've written down drama over song. And then now we've had an odd reference to the Captain von Trapp, being pro-Austrian and not German. Now, of course, at this stage we have to associate German with Nazi, and it's just been specifically pointed out in the plot that he therefore isn't a Nazi, which is actually working against the clues that we were given earlier. So he's pro-Austrian, he's very military, but he isn't Nazi. And yet we've got this story about the housekeeper, the cross housekeeper, telling us all how the Captain makes his children march. So that once again underlines his military characteristics. It's quite that seems quite a sophisticated thing to be asking an audience to pick up. It seems to be saying he is military, he is Austrian, but he's not Nazi. Oh, here we are, another song. This is a well-known one. Lonely Goatherd, and it's being sung to drown out a storm. I suppose you could look at this symbolically, actually. Being a lonely goatherd is about as Austrian a subject for a song as it's possible to get, and it's being used to drown out the din of something violent like a storm. That really, in a way, ties in with what we've just been told about the Captain, that he's very pro-Austrian, and he's trying to drown out the storm of Nazism. Or am I reading too much into it? This scene, actually, is a triumph of playfulness as Maria plays with the children and keeps them happy whilst the storm's going on, and she sings about goat herds. But I've written, why are they not rebuked for making a noise by the rest of the family? Do we have to assume that Captain von Trapp isn't home? Certainly if I was in my bed, and everyone does look as though they've gone to bed, including Maria. If I was in my bed and a storm was going on, I certainly wouldn't welcome people singing their way through it if I was in another room. Oh, and we're in an advertisement break. So there we are, more punctuation. End of scene. And here we are back again. The Captain is now talking to Elsa and to Max. So they're obviously friends of his. And of course, I can't help but notice Max is possibly the highest profile of the actors in the show so far. That's Alexander Armstrong. I say highest profile, he's the man who's most on television. Obviously, I recognised Maria Friedman earlier, but she's probably not as well known to a television audience, sadly. Max says, never start out looking for the people you end up getting. Well, obviously that's a coded reference about friends and enemies, isn't it? So we can see the politics of this building up quite nicely. Now, another song. How Can Love Survive? I don't know this one. It's about two rich people getting together emotionally. It feels strangely sort of brittle, really. If this was funnier, it would have been by Cole Porter, but it's not. Oh, we have a false lyric. There we are on Mercedes. Don't like that. Well, this is an unknown song. I've never heard this before. And I must say it's quite hard to care about the dilemma being portrayed. However, by now I'm starting to realise that although Elsa is being identified as the love interest for the captain, I don't think that's going to work out well. Rolf's back. Now, Rolf is now wearing a swastika. That's not good, is it? You'd have to be a brave writer to make your principal romantic hero a Nazi. I'm guessing, therefore, that he's not quite the character I thought he was. And here are the children. They're arriving, and they are changed. They're much more playful than they used to be. So Maria's been weaving her magic on them, and they're being told off by the captain, so he hasn't changed. Right, okay, well, I think we can work out what's happening there. And Maria is telling off her boss. She's a brave soul, isn't she? She's telling off the captain, and she's revealing his aloofness. That's interesting. Aloofness suggests thoughtlessness as well. He's not deliberately bad to his children. He's just distant from them. Almost by negligence, it seems. And here we are, we're getting the Sound of Music sung again, this time by the children. I've written off stage, but you get the idea for television. They're obviously in another room. And now they're coming into the enormous hallway, and now they're singing for Elsa. They really do like their singing, these children, don't they? That's interesting. Now the captain is joining in with his children singing. So this is clearly meant to be an emotional transition. I'm not sure it's been earned. I can see that the idea is that Maria's given him a bloody good telling off and he's had a think about it and he's now trying to engage with his children. I see that intellectually. I'm not sure that it's been emotionally earned. Maybe the timescale is just too quick. The captain has fired Maria and he has unfired Maria in a very short space of time, so she's back in. And now he's reprising the Sound of Music again. That's odd, we're only halfway through Act 1 and we're reprising songs. Now Maria's joining in with him and Elsa isn't. That's interesting. She's watching. So she's quite shrewd, I guess. So she sees what's going on. I'm sure that'll pay off later. Now, here's the symbolic thing. The captain has put his whistle down. He was using his whistle earlier to keep the children in military trim, as it were. So by putting that down, he's relinquishing his military attitudes to his children, I guess. Going back to that idea of the Sound of Music being sung and sung and sung again all the way through Act 1, I suppose it is supposed to represent Austria. It was presented earlier as being a folk song, wasn't it? So it's eternal and permeating and part of the culture. Once again, not her song, so it's being... all these songs are sort of being diegetically sung. That's quite interesting. Now, Elsa is talking to Maria, and the camera has cut to the top of the staircase. That's very interesting. We've not had this view before. We're looking through the banisters into the enormous hallway, where it's just Elsa and Maria. And Maria is saying she's going to pray for Elsa. Well, that's obviously a portent, isn't it? And advertisements, here we come. Right, end of scene. Now, that's interesting. The advertisements are over, and we've got a little scene-setting photograph, like they used to do in American dramas and comedies, where they would show you the apartment block, which contextualised the apartment scene that you would see next, where the drama would take place. We're seeing that here. So this is the Schloss. And interestingly, it's the Schloss at night. It's an intertitle card, really. Oh, we have stars out, and there's a soiree going on. And this is a waltz version of My Favourite Things. Another reprise, although in a slightly different way. This is obviously just background music, not the song, just the music. Richard Rodgers was known as the king of the waltz, so I suppose it's right that he gets one in. So this soiree is going on. It's a very glamorous dinner going on in the Schloss garden. Oh, bit of politics. We're talking about the Anschluss. Is it going to happen? So that's obviously the politics, which is eating the country. This isn't a very successful soiree. The guests aren't talking to each other. Everyone's obviously very antagonistic, which is, I assume, to do with the politics. There are people in favour of the Anschluss, which is the taking over of Austria by Germany, their Nazi neighbour. And there are people, of course, who are not. Oh, it's Kurt. He's my favourite. He's dancing with Maria. Oh, and he's just been given the old excuse me by his own father. So he's relinquished his dance so his father can dance with Maria. And this music seems to be Goat Herd again. In a polka form, is it? I don't quite know. Actually, this is quite odd. The captain has obviously seen something in Maria that he likes. Presumably that's what Elsa saw earlier. Because at this time, and in this speech marks class environment, I think it would be very unusual for a senior military man to dance with his servant, even if she's a governess. Oh, now this is oddly cinematic. The rest of the dancers are dancing in slow motion, whilst the captain and Maria don't. Now, obviously that focuses on them and allows us to hear their conversation and also show that they're presumably falling in love. So at last we're getting what I suspect must be the real romantic relationship going on. Sorry, Rolf, sorry, Liesl. But it's an odd thing to do. It doesn't look very televisual. It doesn't look very theatrical. This is very much a cinematic way of doing this. An odd borrowing from another genre. And Elsa has seen, of course. Ugh. The music is underscoring the fact that Captain and Maria are falling in love because it is, and I've written this down here, twinkling music. That shows love. Max has arrived, and here we have one of the children, who's obviously much more shrewd and a better judge of psychology than Maria is, because it's the child who observes that the Captain and Maria are in love. Right, the children are singing again in their enormous hallway. Oh, it's a concert hallway, ha ha. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, good night. Very good diction. You can hear every word, actually. That's quite good for a group of 7 children. Very impressed, really. And there are built-in harmonies on this version, so it's a much more complex song than perhaps it first seems. And at last we're starting to see the characters of the children come out. I mean, it's underscored by their particular lines in the song, in fairness, but at least they are acting up to those characters, so we are seeing something of them. Now that's nice. The grown-ups who are watching sing the last goodbye back to the children, so that's adding a certain kind of charm. What this actually does makes this soiree a bit more homely. It's at last turning into a nice party, although everyone's going home or going to bed. They've all gone, and Maria is here on the steps, so she's coming down this staircase into the hall. This is happening while the guests are dining, I see. So they haven't gone to bed, they've gone to dinner. Now she's leaving because she's been told that she and the captain are in love and she didn't realise it. It seems a fairly odd response, but there we are. And we're back to the Latin music, by which I don't mean Latin rhythms, I mean songs in Latin. And so that is the end of Act 1. Musical talk. Well, there we are. That was Act 1 of The Sound of Music Live. I hope you were able to follow the story as I described it, and that you thought that the notes that I'd written down actually added something to the piece and to your understanding. Certainly from my point of view, it was very interesting watching the story unfold. It doesn't underlabour its points. I think all its emotional points are very clearly laid out, and so are its plot points, but that in itself is not a bad thing. It is quite engaging. I took out all the advertisements from my version of it, so I can tell you that Act 1 comes in at 1 hour and 7 minutes. And what we're not getting, of course, is any applause, because though it's live, it's not in front of a live audience. And there was no overture. And I wrote down 87 comments. So that's 87 different things came into my mind during the course of that 67-minute Act 1. I've also written down a kind of end of Act 1 summary. And once again, I'm speaking from my notes here. This has been fairly enjoyable. It's fairly reserved, not in any way cinematic. It's quite theatrical in feel, but it's punctuated by advertisements and the odd televisual choice. That's that business of the television grammar I was talking about with Tim Saywood a couple of weeks ago. The characters are described as having particular traits, but actually sometimes the way they're performed or the actions they carry out are perhaps less representative of those traits than we've been told that they have. It's like the description is being used to delineate character rather than the performances or the writing. And my final note on Act 1 is that the children are good, but they're incidental. That has been a surprise. I've always assumed that the Von Trapp children were all over the place all the time. But actually, they come in and out of the plot quite a lot, usefully, but it's not about them at all. Anyway, imagine you've had an ice cream, or an interval drink. You've queued for the lavatory. This is what you do if you're in a theatre, of course. This isn't true for television, but you can do it at home anyway if you want. And now, we'll start again with Act 2 of The Sound of Music live on ITV, point to point, based on my notes taken contemporaneously as I watched Act 2 on television. Musical talk. Well, here we are, Act 2. And this is a surprise, we're starting again with the nunnery. I thought we'd moved away from there, really. They were obviously just an introduction in Act 1, but here they are again at the beginning of Act 2. And we have a placeholder card, the nunnery at night, and once again the Latin music. But this time it's playing under the scene, rather than being the focus of the first few minutes. The Mother Superior, there she is, sewing, and she's interviewing Maria for a long chat. She does seem to be a very liberal Mother Superior, I must say. Very appealing, very nice. You like her immediately. She's actually got that twinkle in her eye, which shows that she can both run the nunnery, but also she's not too authoritarian. She seems to be quite a liberal thinker. There's no other way of putting it. Well, here we are, the comic's favourite song, Climb Every Mountain. I've heard so many comic versions of this. It immediately makes me think of the radio programme I'm Sorry I'll Read That Again. In one episode they had someone sing Prime Ivory Mouse Tusks to this particular piece of music. However, let's take it at face value. Well, it's quite an old school song, this. It's sort of underlining the dialogue about striving for better things. But it is only the fact that Maria is obviously being affected by the lyrics and what the Mother Superior is singing to her that gives the song any dramatic purpose. Otherwise it would just be, let me give you some advice in song form. She's reacting to the advice. That's what makes a song a successful one, I suppose. But that's quite a passive role. It's quite reactionary. It certainly feels like an anthem, but it's not being sung as an anthem. It seems oddly underpowered, just being sung by the Mother Superior. I've written here, would this be better if all the other nuns arrived and joined in, giving it more power? That said, Maria Friedman is singing this very beautifully, but it's giving it a much more intimate sense of giving advice than being an anthem about instructing people, if you like. There does seem to be a bit of an odd misstep on the lyric here. It finishes with "till you find your dream," but it's been made very clear that love is not Maria's dream. In fact, she's run from it. It might be her dream later on, but at this moment, the dream that she's got is not to be married and is to do God's work as a nun. In fact, that's been pretty much the theme all the way through Act 1. She's appalled at herself for falling in love. She's not happy with it. Oh, we're back at the Schloss. Right, OK. So Max comes across as a very pleasant character, affable, certainly. He's playing with the children. He's playing blind man's buff, to the tune of Lonely Goat Herd again. A lot of recycling in this score. The children are back in their blue uniform. That suggests that Captain Von Trapp has regressed a bit and reverted back to his military aloofness, I suppose. Well, I say Alexander Armstrong's comedy skills are coming across quite nicely here in a very understated way. He's got a bit of throwaway comedy going on. Elsa says to him, "I feel like a brisk walk," and she intimates towards him that he's expected to come along too, and he says, "Oh, just what I need. Is anyone using the car?" It may not come across very well there, but it works as a nice little lighter moment on the stage. A real throwaway, though. Oh, this is odd. We've had the suggestion that the captain is returning to his military aloofness, but he is trying to get the children to sing. And it's The Sound of Music again, which I think by now we have to assume is a local folk song. So it's yet another reprise, and he's joining in with them as they sing it, but then he's stopping it. He's stopped it, right, OK. It's obviously too much for him. Oh no, he's now announced his engagement to Elsa. I have to say, he doesn't come across as being a reversion to his military aloofness, so he's not in mourning for Maria in the way that he was for his wife. To use the horrible modern term, this feels very much like a rebound. But then again, the relationship with Elsa has always seemed a little bit like a business arrangement rather than an emotional one, so it's hard to care very much. Now the children are on their own, and they're singing to cheer themselves up, and they're singing My Favourite Things, which of course is the purpose of that song, so it makes perfect sense, and it is yet another reprise. Even Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Doodah doesn't do its mega mix until the very end. It seems very strange that we're getting a kind of best of The Sound of Music whilst The Sound of Music is actually on. Now this sequence, as the children are walking through the house as they sing their song, this is done in a very TV way. This feels neither theatrical nor cinematic, purely television in terms of its grammar. And of course, as they sing Here Comes Maria, she's come back and she's joining in the song. There we are. It's telling that she goes to the children first and not to the captain. And now the children are telling her that the captain has become engaged to Elsa. And that's followed immediately by an interview with Maria and the captain. Well, we've seen one of these before. Right, now we have Max, Elsa and the captain having tea together. And we're in a different room. This appears to be one of the rooms in the Schloss with a gramophone in it. And there's a bit more plot. The captain is saying he would defy the German Anschluss. But Elsa and Max don't agree. That's not going to go well, is it? But these are quite big terms being discussed in a very small way. They're having tea in a very middle-class way, in a very middle-class room, and having a very middle-class discussion about the politics. And yet the issues at hand are really enormous here. For the Austrian-loving captain, it's about his homeland being invaded by a foreign country with a particularly repugnant political philosophy behind it. That's Nazism. And by 1938, which is when this is set, it would be known that if you didn't agree with the Nazis, you were going to get into a lot of trouble. This is potentially existential stuff, life and death, and yet the way it's framed is so small, as it would be, of course. Elsa and Max don't agree, so they're prepared to live with what happens. It's odd, isn't it? Because I suspect in real terms that's actually how most people would react to that situation. You feel helpless in the face of an oncoming invasion, and you just want to live with the consequences. And yet we're expected to feel sympathy for the captain, but that can only work because we know we're watching this in retrospect. We know how the Second World War ends. If we were watching this in 1938, which of course we couldn't have done as it wasn't happening, but if we had watched this in 1938, I wonder how we'd feel. Who would we feel sympathy for? And now we're on for another song. Oh, and it's being sung to the gramophone. So Elsa is singing a song about another day going past. This is a duet with Max. Oh dear, it's another duffer. This is another song I've not heard, and I don't know it, and I don't like it. Poor Elsa, she's got all the bad songs. There seem to be only 2 songs in this piece, apart from the Latin opening, which aren't really very good, and she gets both of them. Oh, it's a trio now. The captain is joining in, but he's disagreeing with them. Once again, this feels like Oscar Hammerstein in particular is borrowing someone else's style to try and make a point, but not very well. Once again, you feel that Cole Porter could have done this better. Oh, well, that song ended suddenly. You turn off the gramophone and the song stops. Actually, that's quite a clever conceit and shows it's once again another diegetic song. Elsa's becoming worried that the captain's attitude is going to have an effect on her. I.e., if he puts himself in danger because of his nationalism for Austria and his anti-Nazi position, if she's engaged or married to him, that's going to put her in danger. Mark you, she's already been established as being someone who's prepared to bend with the wind in order to save herself. Quite understandably, a very human response, so one can't feel too against her on this. Well, that's an odd way of jilting somebody. She talks about missing the sunsets and then calls the marriage off. I wonder how that will work in real life today. I'm sorry, my dear, we'll never have those country walks. Goodbye forever! Well, this is a rebound reaction. Immediately after that, Maria and the captain are talking, and he has confessed his love for her. I have written rebound! ! And underlined. I must say that for the captain, his wife is now well and truly buried. He was in deep mourning at the beginning of the programme, and since then he's been engaged or fallen in love with 2 different women. So Maria has now confessed her love for him, so she's obviously got over that particular hurdle, and they're kissing. So here we are, halfway through Act 2, and the romance has really started here. I suppose it's been will they, won't they, but it hasn't felt like a will they, won't they. Not to me, anyway. It hasn't come across that way. I wonder if one's just expected to think that's going to happen, and therefore they've not put much into the piece in order to actually give you the clues that it's going to happen. And the symbolism, this is where the direction comes in. They're doing all this in a sun-filled garden. Doesn't love make everything wonderful, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, yes, Maria is now singing a song, but it's very slow. Oh, it's got a relentlessly downbeat tempo as well. This is feeling a bit tepid, this song, even in what is actually a very good score. This is quite a tepid number. Somewhere in my childhood I must have done something good. Well, I won't be whistling this at the bus stop. This is very televisual. There are close-ups in turn on both their faces as they sing. Now, you can't really do that in the theatre. The proscenium arch doesn't really allow you to do close-ups. I think this would look a bit strange in the cinema as well, where the size of a screen also works against intimacy to a degree. You can get subtlety, but you can't really have intimacy. Television is actually the best medium for intimacy. It's neither too big nor too small, and we're seeing it here. So this is very much the television grammar for romance. It does require subtle face movements. And the children are watching in their pyjamas. Now that's odd. They've obviously either all gone to bed very, very early because the sun is still out, or it's actually night and the sun's not gone down. I don't know what's going on there. Except, of course, that it's obviously a directorial choice to show that Maria is the right person for the captain. Right, now this is a scene change. The children are now in the abbey, the nunnery. Why are they there? Oh, it's the wedding! Well, I mean, they didn't take long, did they? So the nuns are singing Hallelujah, and this is Maria's wedding. Well, we've answered the question, how do you solve a problem like Maria? You get her married off to the local bigwig, I think is the answer. No verse for that, though. And to prove it, here we are, a reprise of How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria. I'm a genius, I could write this stuff. Here we are, the nuns singing it again. Yet another reprise. And here we have another aerial shot. I do quite like these, they're different. It stops this being pedestrianly directed, which it isn't. Some thought and imagination has gone into it. Ooh, this is quite a cultural change. We're now moving to the Anschluss. This is 1938. And they're using original newsreel footage and radio broadcasts to show you what's happening, and subtitles to explain. So here are Nazi troops in a friendly invasion, as the Anschluss was really, I suppose, designed to be, taking over. I have to say, it does feel a bit out of place, for me at least. In terms of rhythm, at least, if nothing else. The Sound of Music so far has its own pace and rhythm, and suddenly this feels like an injection from another world. It's actually, yes, it's the intrusion of reality into a carefully constructed world which purports to be real life, but of course isn't. Now we can see that the world has changed very firmly in Austria. It's a bit later, and the local Gauleiter has come round. We saw him at the party earlier, and now he's in uniform. So he's obviously assimilated himself into the new regime fairly sharpish. And he's come round to insist that the swastika is flown from a flag from the captain's castle, his Schloss. That is petty bureaucracy, isn't it? You're not flying the right flag. So he's obviously a threat. The threat, which has been discussed but unseen, is now real and personified. When politics becomes about the actual people, I suppose it becomes a real threat. That's what's happening here. And Max is here, and it's revealed that Max has been promoted as a result of the Anschluss, mostly as other people have been demoted or removed. So he is sort of surfing the tide of what's happening. He seems to be strangely amoral, I think, is the answer for Max. You're supposed to like him, clearly, but he is not averse to improving his situation at the expense of others. And he's living in the Schloss, apparently. Right, OK, so Max is living with the captain. Well, here's more newsreel, and this time featuring Himmler. And some sinister music, as though a picture of Himmler wasn't sinister enough. Of course, they're all black and white, these inserts, which also is jarring in a strange way. And now we have another sort of intertitle placemaker card. So it's the Schloss, but it's the Schloss at night. Now, I assume that represents the darkness enfolding Austria politically, as well as just by night time. Now, Max, who's a little bit tunnel-visioned about performance, really. It's interesting, actually. He wants the children to perform at the local Karlsberg Festival 1938. And that seems to be the only thing that really matters to him. He seems to be faintly oblivious to everything else that's going on. And he's showing the children the programme for it. Oh, he's been living at the house because the captain and Maria are on their honeymoon and they've just come back. Right, OK, that does explain that. He's a live-in babysitter. He was Uncle Max, I think. And, I see, the children have been enrolled into the festival by Max and the captain hasn't been consulted because he's been away and he does not approve. He does not approve of the children singing. Although he did informally at home, so this is obviously he doesn't want them to sing in public. It's difficult to work out if his objection is because he doesn't want his private life to be on show, i.e. his children performing. He does seem a very private man in some ways. Or whether it's because he doesn't want to be connected with the new regime and what's going on in Austria. Goodness, another song, and yes, it's another reprise. You Are 16 Going on 17. But this time it's Maria singing to Liesl, the eldest daughter, about how she loves her father, the captain. I don't like that lyric. When it happens, after it happens. Now, is that the lyric or the way it's being sung? There's something not quite right about that. And there's some odd muffling of the sound going on as Liesl is held in the breast of Maria. Well, I assume a microphone is being smothered somewhere. Here comes handsome Rolf, the telegraph boy. But, right, now he's very... Yes, well, it was hinted, wasn't it, that he wasn't really very nice in the last act. He's turned up. He's now and I've written this down, he's very different. He is a snotty Nazi. And he's threatening both Captain Von Trapp and Liesl. Well, I think that's the end of that relationship. And we're now at a crunch point. The captain has been offered the captaincy in the Nazi Navy. He's always wanted to go back on board a ship, but of course it will be for the Nazis and not for Austria. So this isn't just the theoretical end of politics. He's now got to make a decision one way or the other. And he's deciding to run away. It's a busy day in this Schloss today. They're just back from honeymoon. He's had news about his children being press-ganged into a concert. He's had an offer of a Nazi ship to captain. And now the German admiral and the Gauleiter, who we saw earlier, are coming to visit. If they'd been away on their honeymoon still, this wouldn't have happened. I bet they wish they booked another week. That's interesting. Maria is now being introduced as the Baroness. Have I got that right? Now that's interesting. This is Maria showing her hidden depths. She's buying some time by persuading the Admiral that her husband, the captain, will be happy to join the Navy, but only after the concert has taken place. Yes, the Gauleiter clearly doesn't buy it, and I'm afraid I'm with him on this. This sounds very fishy. However, it seems to satisfy the Admiral. And we're pausing for advertisements here. And this is interesting. You used to see this on television in the past, certainly in the 70s and 80s, when live television still occasionally took place. What would happen is a scene would end and then you would wait for the advertisement break. But just occasionally, that would come a second or two a little later than you would think would be natural, meaning that the actor has to hold this slightly unnatural pose for a little bit too long. That's what's happening here. So the poor old Gauleiter here is having to look sinister for just a little bit too long. He's had to freeze while the adverts come on. This unfortunately makes it all a little bit pantomime, really. That extra 2 seconds on that pose has made this unsubtle. Right, well, we're back from the advertisement break, and we're now at the concert. So we're at the Salzburg Festival 1938, as advertised. And we're getting the song Do Re Mi again in a new version. But yes, I suppose it's still a reprise. It's quite a small concert hall for the Salzburg Festival. It looks like a church hall, not many people in the audience. So the whole Von Trapp family is singing at the concert in this tiny little concert hall. I think the hall in the Schloss is bigger than this. Now the captain is singing Edelweiss, so at least it's a new song. We've not heard this before. And he's playing the guitar as he sings. Oh no, that's only for the first verse. He stopped playing the guitar for the second verse, but the orchestra has carried on. That's nice. And to show that he isn't really a natural doing this, he forgets his words. That's actually quite difficult for an actor to do, to pretend to forget their words in a way that doesn't look like they have actually forgotten their words, bearing in mind this is being watched by several millions of people who know it's a live performance. That's a big ask of an actor, that. It seems to work, though. So he's forgetting his words, which show that he's not really a singer, and Maria, his wife, joins in to save him. Therefore, the pretense of actually singing before they flee is upheld. Oh, I see, in the last line of Edelweiss, bless my homeland forever. Well, that's telling, isn't it? So this is him giving Austria his blessing before he disappears to try and save it from afar, presumably. And Max is the MC at this festival. So he's discussing with the judges who's going to win the contest. Oh, I see, and whilst they're judging, the Von Trapps are asked to come out and give everyone an encore. Well, that stops us having dead time, I suppose. And here they are, so they haven't escaped yet. Ah, right, the stakes have been upped a bit. We've been told that the Nazi Guard of Honour are here to escort the captain once the concert is over. So they're not going to be given any leeway to escape. So that's the tension suddenly built in. This is the equivalent of hiding in plain sight. The family, who are singing on the stage in front of the audience, including several senior Nazis, and the Gauleiter, are whispering in each other's ears about what they're going to do. It's very obvious. Oh well. And the song they're singing is So Long, Farewell, Auf Wiedersehen, Goodbye. Yet another reprise, but of course on this we know that they're going to flee. So that is a bit clever, really. Once again, it's telling everyone in plain sight that they're about to scarper. And then, oh, as they did when they were singing it in the hallway of the Schloss, the children disappear one by one or two by two, in accordance with the song's requirements. So they are, and I've written this down, escaping in full view. Oh, that's interesting. Max sees that they're escaping. He realises what's going on, but he's not saying anything. So this is his moment of redemption, presumably. Mark you, he's not a hard and fast Nazi, is he? He's just someone being swept along by the tide of history. He's sort of morally, or indeed amorally, neutral. And then it falls to Max to announce the three winners. These are extras, of course, who are the third prize winners and the second prize winners. I say there's an unexpected comedy moment here when the extras who are playing the second prize winners are perhaps slightly milking the applause. I don't know if that's been written in or whether that's just happening. Well, there's a surprise. The Von Trapps have won. Well, who'd have thought it? Surely, bearing in mind his connection with the family and the fact he's been living in the Schloss for the last few weeks, Max wouldn't be part of the judging panel. That doesn't seem very fair. I appreciate that may be quite a small issue in the big scheme of things, following a Nazi takeover, but there's a democratic deficit, it seems to me, in that judging panel. So Max is calling for an encore from the Von Trapps because they've won, but they're not coming out. Where are they? Well, they've run away, they've fled. Oh, and Max is arrested. Which is odd, actually. One feels sympathy for Max. Oh dear, we've got one of those slightly too long hold the scenes before the ad breaks. That's actually rather destroyed the tension. Poor old Alexander Armstrong is having to maintain the look of, oh no, I've been arrested, what's going to become of me? Just a bit too long. Not his fault. The adverts haven't cracked in yet. And then we move into the ad break. We must be coming up to the last section now, because obviously the plot is rolling along at a fair pace now. So we're back from the advert break. And the Nazis are searching the nunnery. Well, I suppose Maria was there for a long time. It's a sensible place to look. Now, oh, and we are shown the family are hiding in the grounds of the nunnery. Well, I suppose it was mentioned earlier, right at the beginning, in fact, that Maria had speech marks disappeared for the day when it turned out she seemed to be in the garden. So obviously no one ever does go in the garden. Ah, what's this? This seems very silly. Liesl, who's hiding with her family and must know what's at stake. She's old enough to know. She is 16 going on 17 after all, as we know from many reprises. Has leapt out on the sight of Rolf, who's dressed as an SS guard in a black uniform now. That's quite a promotion from Telegraph Boy. And she's leapt out to not to confront him, just to sort of just to show him that she's there, really. I suppose it's a pang of love, is it? It's not very clear what's going on here. It looks like Rolf has come into the garden quite unexpectedly to search in this most forbidden of all places, apparently. And one sight of him in his uniform has got Liesl so excited that she's leapt out from her hiding place to run up to him, and thereby put the whole family at risk of, presumably, prison and execution. Silly cow. Right, this is odd. So the captain, in his fatherly way, quite understandably, has come out of hiding to try and defend and look after his daughter, which is very brave, because that does mean arrest and execution for him, surely. And Rolf has decided that he's not going to tell on them, so he lies to his superiors and says he hasn't seen them in the garden and the Nazis leave, thereby leaving the family safe. That's a very odd sequence. It doesn't make much sense. I see it's been put in to create tension, but there's no logic to it. Why would Liesl do that? She can't be that stupid, can she? And of course, why would Rolf do it? He's been shown to be pretty fervent as a Nazi. He's not a nice man. So at the end of the day, their escape is due to the kindness of a Nazi. What kind of moral is that? Anyway, the Nazis have gone from the nunnery, but the nuns tell the family that all the roads and the borders have been blocked by the Nazis, which means there's only one way out for the family. They've got to escape to Switzerland, which of course requires them going over those hills, which I believe are alive with the sound of music. And the Mother Superior and all the nuns are exhorting them to climb every mountain, which of course is literal here. They've got to climb a mountain to escape, and it is the anthem version. This is no longer the intimate piece of advice of scaling your personal problems and barriers. This is now about actual physical mountain climbing. This is for Brian Blessed. Still, it is an amazing song. It might be a reprise, but it's a very anthemic song to finish on. You're getting a full welly here. It's an authentic climax, actually. It's also quite nice that actually we don't know that they get to safety. There is still this element of surprise or doubt about it. So it's not quite cut and dried. They've escaped the Nazis, but will they survive their trek to Switzerland? And we see the family leave in the snow, which of course is a good Christmas ending, which is when this is being broadcast. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Act 2 of The Sound of Music. That was quite good. Oh no, there's a sting in the tail. As they play the music over the closing credits, it's been ruined as the ITV announcer is speaking over it to advertise what the next programmes this evening are going to be. In a way, though, I do miss the applause and the walk down for the actors. In a way, you don't have a chance to thank them for what you've seen. Still, on the whole, that was very, very good. And that, as I say, was the end of Act 2. Musical talk. That was The Sound of Music Live. I enjoyed it a great deal, but my notes aren't quite finished yet. I wrote a few more down as a series of afterthoughts of what I had just seen. So these were written in the direct aftermath of the ending of the show. And I have written, I enjoyed that, and it was drama first. The director had decided to go with the drama of the plot more than anything else. All the songs were very well known to me, except those two that Elsa sang. But it did feel like a 1970s adaptation. And that's because of the television grammar that was being used. There's no location filming, and it does feel like the four-camera model of television broadcasts that was rife in the 60s, 70s and 80s. But, of course, because it's not theatrical, you do miss the climax to each song or scene, where normally when a song ends, you've got time to absorb it a little bit during the applause, which also allows you to reset and recalibrate. But, of course, with television drama, you go straight from one thing to the next, so actually each song ends slightly anticlimactically. It's interesting also that so many of those songs when sung outside of the show are sung in their anthemic versions with full welly, full power. They soar. And of course so much of this is actually about folk music, that it's about intimate advice and intimate singing, that actually the anthems only arrive later on. So it's quite nice to see those songs in the context of the show, and you realise that actually they're really intimate numbers rather than anthemic numbers. Some very nice directorial touches. No bad performances at all, but you couldn't call it naturalistic in any way. It's certainly not a naturalistic show, and it certainly wasn't a naturalistic production of the show. It did feel like a televised play, which of course is exactly what it was. It wasn't cinematic in any way. And that feels very odd in the context of modern television. Although, personally, I thought it was wonderful. I have no problem with that style of television from the 1980s, and it's nice to see it on television again. So overall, a big success. And that ends our experimental point-to-point look at The Sound of Music live. But at the end of any film, and indeed any television programme, there's usually the credits. So here they are. It was broadcast on the 20th of December 2015, live on ITV, Britain's main commercial television channel. Maria was played by Cara Toynton. Captain Von Trapp was Julian Ovenden. Alexander Armstrong played Max. Catherine Kelly played Elsa. Maria Friedman was the mother abbess. Mel Gedroic was the housekeeper. And Paul Copley was the butler. And it was directed by Koki Gedroic. Really rather well. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to a Sound of Music virgin telling you his thoughts as he saw them, as he saw it, the live version of The Sound of Music on ITV. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at how television can show live musical theatre in different ways, and they've all been successful. I love Gypsy. I love The Sound of Music, it turns out. Although whether I go and see it on stage, I don't know. But I certainly love this production. And all I can say to our British television broadcasters is, more please. Which suggests Oliver, doesn't it? Anyway, that's enough for this week. Join us again on Musical Talk next week when we've got something very different to talk about, because that's the exciting thing about musical theatre. There's so much range. And whilst there's range, we on Musical Talk will be trying to ride it. And that's a different song again. And as part of that song, I can see the deer and the antelope playing. What kind of deer is it? Oh, it's a doe. A deer. A female deer. Oh, the Labour jokes never stop, do they? But this episode will, and it's about to. So, to prove it, I'm going to say those magic words. Join us again next week, but until then, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, @MusicalTalkThos.